A man walked into Wells' restaurant thinking he was safe. He had stolen from Bumpy Johnson and lived to tell about it. 3 whole months without consequences. He thought Bumpy had gone soft. He was wrong. Bumpy was already sitting at table 7 when he arrived. No bodyguards, no weapon visible, just a cup of coffee and those eyes, those terrible patient eyes. 20 minutes later, the thief was dead on the floor. Heart attack, the doctor said. But the man's face told a different story. It was frozen in pure terror. Whatever Bumpy Johnson said to him, whatever he saw in those eyes, it literally scared him to death. This is the story of how the godfather of Harlem killed a man without touching him. The year was 1964. Harlem was changing. The old rules were being forgotten, and a man named Vernon Hayes thought he could steal from a legend and walk away clean. He thought wrong. But to understand what happened that night at Wells' restaurant, you need to understand who Bumpy Johnson really was and why one look from him could stop a man's heart. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson earned his nickname from a bump on the back of his head, but he earned his reputation from something far more dangerous, his mind. By 1964, Bumpy had spent over 30 years building an empire in Harlem. He had survived wars with Dutch Schultz. He had negotiated as an equal with Lucky Luciano. He had controlled the numbers racket, the policy banks, the streets themselves. When Bumpy spoke, Harlem listened. When Bumpy was silent, Harlem held its breath. But then came Alcatraz. In 1952, the federal government finally caught Bumpy on drug conspiracy charges. They sent him to the most notorious prison in America, a rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay, designed to break the unbreakable. For a decade, Bumpy Johnson disappeared from Harlem streets. And in his absence, things changed. New players emerged. Old loyalties faded. Men who once trembled at Bumpy's name started to forget why they were afraid. Vernon Hayes was one of those men. He had come up in Harlem during Bumpy's absence, running numbers for mid-level operators who had carved up pieces of Bumpy's old territory. Vernon was smart, ambitious, ruthless in his own small way. He watched the older gangsters grow fat and comfortable, and he wanted what they had. When Bumpy was released from Alcatraz in 1963, Vernon paid attention. He watched the old man return to Harlem, watched the neighborhood throw him a parade like some kind of conquering hero. But Vernon saw something the cheering crowds missed. He saw a 60-year-old man with gray in his hair and lines on his face. He saw someone who had spent 10 years locked in a cage while the world moved on without him. Vernon saw weakness, and Vernon saw opportunity. One of Bumpy's policy banks operated out of a barbershop on 135th Street. The manager was an old-timer named Roosevelt, who had been with Bumpy since the Dutch Schultz Wars. Roosevelt trusted Vernon because Vernon had been running numbers for years without causing problems. That trust was a mistake. Over 3 weeks, Vernon skimmed $50,000 from the operation. He was careful. He was patient. He cooked the books so well that Roosevelt never noticed the money was gone. Then Vernon disappeared. He moved out of his old apartment overnight, changed his routines, started spending money in parts of Harlem where Bumpy's influence was weakest. He bought a Cadillac Eldorado, midnight blue with white leather interior. He bought suits from a tailor on Fifth Avenue. He rented an apartment on Sugar Hill with a view that made him feel like a king. For 3 months, Vernon waited for the consequences. He slept with a gun under his pillow. He checked over his shoulder every time he walked down the street. He avoided the barbershops and restaurants where Bumpy's people gathered. But nothing happened. No one came for him. No threats, no warnings, no middle-of-the-night visits from men with razors and bad intentions. After 3 months, Vernon started to relax. He started to believe the rumors he had heard. Bumpy Johnson was finished. Prison had broken him. The old lion had lost his teeth. Harlem belonged to younger, hungrier men now, men like Vernon Hayes. He started going out again, started showing off his new money. He started eating at Wells' restaurant on 7th Avenue, one of Harlem's finest establishments. Good food, good jazz, the kind of place where a man with money could be seen and admired. Vernon loved the attention. He loved the way women looked at him when he pulled up in his Cadillac. He loved the way waiters rushed to seat him at the best tables. He loved the feeling of having made it. On this particular night, Vernon arrived at Wells around 9 in the evening. He had a date with a woman named Dolores, a singer from one of the clubs on Lenox Avenue. She was beautiful and expensive, exactly the kind of woman Vernon wanted to be seen with. They sat at a table near the window. Vernon ordered steak, medium rare. Dolores ordered the fried chicken. The jazz trio in the corner played something slow and smooth. Life was perfect. Vernon was telling Dolores about his plans to buy a nightclub, spinning dreams out of stolen money. She was laughing at his jokes, impressed by his confidence, unaware that everything he had was built on a foundation of sand. Then the door opened. Vernon did not notice at first. He was too focused on Dolores, too wrapped up in the fantasy he was selling. But something changed in the restaurant. Conversations grew quieter. Waiters moved more carefully. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, charged with an electricity that made the hair stand up on the back of Vernon's neck. He felt it before he saw it. That ancient instinct buried deep in the human brain, the warning system that tells prey when a predator has entered the room. Vernon's words trailed off mid-sentence. His smile faded. He turned slowly toward the door, already knowing somehow that his world was about to collapse. Bumpy Johnson stood just inside the entrance. He wore a charcoal gray suit, immaculate despite the summer heat, a white pocket square folded precisely in his breast pocket, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked like a businessman, a banker, a respectable member of society, but his eyes told a different story. Those cold, patient eyes swept across the restaurant like searchlights. Bumpy was alone. No bodyguards flanking him. No enforcers waiting by the door. Just a 60-year-old man with gray at his temples, and a quietness about him that was more terrifying than any display of force. Vernon's hand began to tremble. He set down his fork carefully, trying to hide the shaking. Dolores noticed the change in his face. "Baby, what's wrong?" she asked. Her voice seemed to come from very far away. Vernon could not answer. His throat had closed up. His mouth had gone dry. All he could do was watch as Bumpy Johnson walked to the counter and ordered a cup of coffee. Just coffee, nothing else. The waitress who served him was a young woman named Hattie. Her hand shook so badly that she spilled coffee on the saucer. Bumpy smiled at her warmly and said it was no trouble at all. Then he picked up his cup, turned, and walked toward the back of the restaurant, toward Vernon. Each step measured, deliberate. The footsteps of a man who had all the time in the world. Vernon wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to bolt for the door, to get in his Cadillac and drive until Harlem was just a memory in his rearview mirror. But his legs would not move. He was frozen in his chair, paralyzed by a fear more profound than anything he had ever experienced. Dolores looked between Vernon and the approaching man. She did not know Bumpy Johnson by sight, but she knew terror when she saw it, and Vernon's face was a mask of pure terror. "I have to go," she whispered, grabbing her purse. Vernon barely heard her. The click of her heels, fading toward the door, barely registered. All he could see was Bumpy Johnson pulling out the chair across from him. All he could hear was the soft sound of the chair legs scraping against the floor. All he could feel was his heart pounding against his ribs, like a trapped animal trying to escape. Bumpy sat down. He placed his coffee cup on the table with the precise gentleness of a surgeon setting down a scalpel. Then he looked at Vernon. Just looked. He did not speak, did not threaten, did not reach for a weapon or make any move at all. He simply folded his hands on the table and fixed Vernon with those terrible eyes. Vernon had heard stories about this. Everyone in Harlem had heard stories. They said Bumpy could sit in silence for hours, just watching, letting a man's own guilt destroy him from the inside. They said hardened criminals had confessed everything just to make Bumpy stop looking at them. They said his stare could see into your soul and find every sin you had ever committed. Vernon had always dismissed these stories as exaggerations, legends inflated by time and fear. Now, sitting across from those ancient, merciless eyes, Vernon understood that the stories had not been exaggerated at all. If anything, they had not gone far enough. Bumpy's eyes were empty, not angry, not hateful, just empty. Patient, like the eyes of a man watching an hourglass run out, like the eyes of death itself, waiting. Vernon tried to speak. His voice came out as a croak, barely human. "Bumpy, listen, I can explain." Bumpy raised one finger, just one finger. A simple gesture that somehow carried more authority than a gun pointed at Vernon's head. Vernon's mouth snapped shut immediately. The finger lowered. The silence continued. Around them, the restaurant had grown quiet. People were watching now, their conversations abandoned, their food forgotten. They could feel it too, that electric tension in the air, the sense that something terrible was unfolding at the table by the window. The jazz trio had stopped playing. Even they could sense that music was not appropriate for what was happening. Vernon felt sweat running down his back, soaking through his expensive shirt. His hands were shaking badly now, trembling against the white tablecloth. He gripped the edge of the table to steady them, but the shaking just spread to his arms, his shoulders, his entire body. He was falling apart in front of everyone. 5 minutes passed, or maybe it was 5 hours. Time had lost all meaning for Vernon Hayes. There was only Bumpy's face across the table. Only those empty eyes. Only the silence that pressed down on him like a physical weight. The waitress approached once, asking if everything was all right. Bumpy turned to her with a warm smile, transforming instantly into a kindly old gentleman. "Everything is fine, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." The waitress retreated, confused by the contradiction between Bumpy's friendly demeanor and the naked fear on Vernon's face. The moment she was gone, the warmth vanished from Bumpy's expression. The cold returned. Those eyes locked back onto Vernon like a sniper acquiring a target. Vernon's chest felt tight. His left arm tingled strangely. He told himself it was just fear, just anxiety, the natural response to extreme stress. But the sensation grew worse, spread from his arm to his shoulder, crept up into his jaw. He knew the warning signs. Everyone knew the warning signs, but knowing did not help. Finally, after an eternity of silence, Bumpy moved. He leaned forward slowly, closing the distance between them. Vernon pressed back against his chair instinctively, trying to create space that did not exist. Bumpy's face came within inches of his own. Close enough to smell the coffee on his breath, close enough to see every line that Alcatraz had carved into his features, close enough to drown in those bottomless eyes. "Vernon," Bumpy said. His voice was barely above a whisper, soft as silk, gentle as a lullaby. But underneath that softness was something terrible. "You know what you did." Vernon nodded frantically. He could not help himself. The words spilled out in a desperate flood. "Yes. Yes, I know. I took the money. I'm sorry, I will give it back. Every penny, I swear to God." Bumpy shook his head slowly. Like a father disappointed by a wayward child. Like a teacher saddened by a student who refused to learn. "The money does not matter anymore," Bumpy said softly. The money was never what this was about. Vernon's confusion showed on his face. If not the money, then what? What else was there? Bumpy leaned back slightly, giving Vernon room to breathe. But the relief was temporary, because what Bumpy said next stole every breath from Vernon's lungs. "This is about respect," Bumpy said. "You thought I would not find out. You thought I was finished. You thought you could take from me and walk away without consequences." He paused, letting each word sink in like stones dropped into still water. "You thought wrong." Vernon opened his mouth to respond, to beg, to bargain, to say anything that might save his life. But Bumpy raised that single finger again and Vernon's words died in his throat. "I'm not going to hurt you, Vernon." Bumpy's voice remained soft, almost gentle. "I am not going to have my men visit you in the night. I'm not going to touch a single hair on your head." Vernon felt a flicker of hope pierce through his terror. Maybe Bumpy really had changed in prison. Maybe there was mercy in that cold heart after all. But then Bumpy smiled, and Vernon's hope died as quickly as it had been born. It was not a friendly smile, not a forgiving smile. It was the smile of a man who had already won a game his opponent did not even know they were playing. "I do not need to hurt you," Bumpy continued, "because you are already dying." Vernon blinked. "What?" "You feel it, do you not?" Bumpy asked, his tone casual, conversational, like they were discussing the weather or the score of last night's ball game. The tightness in your chest, the tingling in your arm, the pounding in your heart. Your body knows what your mind refuses to accept. Vernon's hand moved involuntarily to his chest. The pounding was worse now, much worse. His heart was hammering against his ribs like it was trying to break free. The tingling in his arm had become numbness. His jaw ached. His vision was starting to blur around the edges. "What did you do to me?" Vernon gasped. Bumpy shook his head. "I did not do anything to you. You did this to yourself." 3 months of guilt, Bumpy continued. 3 months of fear. 3 months of looking over your shoulder, waiting for consequences that never came. Your body has been wound tight as a spring all this time. The stress, the anxiety, the cortisol flooding your system day after day after day. His voice dropped even lower. "I am not your executioner, Vernon. I am just the trigger. The consequences have been building inside you since the moment you stole that money. I am simply here to collect." Vernon wanted to argue, wanted to scream that this was impossible. You could not kill a man just by looking at him. You could not stop a heart with words alone. But his body was telling a different story. The chest pain was spreading. His breathing came in short, ragged gasps. His left arm hung limp and useless at his side. "This is not real," Vernon wheezed. "You poisoned me. You put something in my food." Bumpy gestured to Vernon's plate, the steak he had been eating when Bumpy arrived. "I have been sitting here for 20 minutes, Bumpy said calmly. "I have not touched your food, have not touched your drink, have not touched you." He spread his hands, palms up. "Innocent. 40 people in this restaurant can testify to that. I have done nothing but sit here and drink my coffee." Vernon looked around desperately. The entire restaurant was watching now. 40 witnesses. 40 people who would swear under oath that Bumpy Johnson never laid a finger on Vernon Hayes. That he just sat there, calm and composed, having a quiet conversation. "Help me," Vernon gasped. His voice was barely a whisper now, weak, fading. "Someone call an ambulance." People stirred. Someone moved toward the phone in the back. But Bumpy did not move, did not call for help, did not show any concern at all. He simply watched with those patient, empty eyes, like a scientist observing an experiment reach its conclusion, like a cat watching a mouse realize there is no escape. "Please," Vernon begged. "Bumpy, please. I will do anything. I will give back the money. I will leave Harlem. I will disappear. Just help me, please." Bumpy took a slow sip of his coffee. Then he set the cup down gently, leaned forward one final time, and whispered 5 words in Vernon's ear. Just 5 words, so quiet that no one else in the restaurant could hear them. The people at nearby tables, the waitress frozen by, the kitchen door, the bartender with the telephone receiver in his hand. None of them could make out what Bumpy Johnson said, but they all saw what happened next. Vernon's eyes went wide, wider than seemed humanly possible. The pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. His mouth opened in a scream that never came. His hands clawed at his chest like he was trying to tear something out. And then he fell. His body pitched forward, face first into his half-eaten steak. He convulsed once, twice, then went completely still. The restaurant erupted into chaos, screaming, shouting. Someone yelled to call an ambulance. The waitress dropped a tray of glasses. People crowded around the fallen man, not knowing what to do, desperate to help. But Bumpy Johnson did not move from his chair. He sat perfectly still, coffee cup in hand, watching the pandemonium unfold around him with an expression of mild concern. When someone finally thought to ask him what happened, Bumpy's voice was calm and steady. "We were just talking, old acquaintances catching up." He grabbed his chest and collapsed. "I do not know what happened." The ambulance arrived 14 minutes later. Vernon Hayes was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was myocardial infarction, a massive heart attack, natural causes. The police took statements from everyone in the restaurant, 40 witnesses, 40 people who all said the same thing. Bumpy Johnson had walked in, ordered coffee, sat down across from Vernon Hayes, and talked quietly with him for about 20 minutes. Then Vernon clutched his chest and collapsed. No violence, no threats, no foul play of any kind. Detective Morrison from the 28th Precinct pulled Bumpy aside for additional questioning. "What did you say to him?" the detective asked. Bumpy smiled warmly. "We talked about old times, about how Harlem has changed, about the importance of treating people with respect." Morrison leaned in. "Witnesses say you whispered something in his ear right before he collapsed. What was it?" Bumpy's smile never wavered. "I told him to take care of himself. That stress is a killer these days. A man has to watch his health. There was nothing to charge. No evidence of any crime. The medical examiner confirmed that Vernon Hayes died of natural causes. His heart simply gave out. It happened to men his age sometimes. Tragic, but not unusual." Morrison had to let Bumpy go. But as the old man walked out of the restaurant and into the Harlem night, the detective knew the truth. So did everyone else who'd been in Wells' restaurant that evening. Bumpy Johnson had killed Vernon Hayes. Killed him without a weapon. Killed him without poison. Killed him without laying a single finger on him. He had used fear itself as his instrument of execution. The story spread through Harlem like fire through dry grass. By morning, everyone from Sugar Hill to Lenox Avenue knew what had happened at Wells' restaurant. Bumpy Johnson scared a man to death. Bumpy Johnson killed with his eyes. Bumpy Johnson whispered 5 words that stopped a man's heart. The details grew more elaborate with each telling, but the core remained the same. You did not steal from Bumpy Johnson. You did not disrespect him. You did not assume that age or prison had made him weak, because even at 60 years old, even after a decade in Alcatraz, Bumpy Johnson was still the most dangerous man in Harlem. Not because of his fists or his razor or his army of enforcers, because of what he could do with nothing but silence and a stare. Men who had carved up his territory while he was away quietly returned what they had taken. Debts that had gone unpaid were suddenly settled. The old order was restored without a shot being fired. And for the next 4 years, until his own heart gave out in that same restaurant in 1968, nobody ever forgot the lesson of Vernon Hayes. The most dangerous weapon is not made of steel. It is fear. Bumpy Johnson understood that better than anyone who ever walked the streets of Harlem. He did not kill Vernon Hayes. Vernon's own guilt killed him. His own terror stopped his heart. Bumpy just sat there and watched it happen. So here is my question to you. What were those 5 words? What could anyone say that would literally scare you to death? Drop your theory in the comments. And be honest, have you ever met someone whose presence alone made your blood run cold? Like this video if it gave you chills. Subscribe if you want more stories about the legends who built Harlem with nothing but reputation and respect. Because we are just getting started, and the next story is even darker.